Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. The boardroom was stiff with tension, the kind of silence that weighs on you, presses down on your chest. Everyone sat around the long table, papers in front of them, eyes darting nervously between my father and my mother. My mother, seated beside him, looked smaller than usual, her posture too straight, too stiff. My father, his jaw tight, had his eyes fixed on the pile of financial reports in front of him. "You don't get it, do you?" he spat, voice low but dripping with venom. "This company's mine. Always has been. Yours is just the window dressing." My mother didn't flinch, but I could see the familiar tightness around her eyes. She didn't respond. She never did. Not in front of people. Not in front of him. "Pathetic," he sneered, turning to the others. "She couldn't even run a lemonade stand without wrecking it." His laugh was hard and cold, and then he slapped her. It wasn't a warning, not a push or a shove. It was a full-on slap, the kind that cut through the air, the kind that everyone could feel. The room froze. I could hear my breath, feel the blood rushing to my head. My hands gripped the edges of the chair, nails digging into the wood. But something inside me snapped. I stood, slow, deliberate, and pulled my security badge from my uniform, placing it on the table. The sound of it hitting the polished wood was sharp. "Check the last file," I said, my voice level, but a quiet fury buzzed beneath. The lead auditor, a middle-aged man with a perpetual frown, blinked at me, confused. The others in the room shifted in their seats, whispering, murmuring. My father's face twisted in recognition. For a second, his arrogance cracked, replaced by a sharp pang of dread. His gaze flickered from me to the badge, then back again. His hands clenched, but no words came. The room waited, and I stood there watching him break. I didn't have to look at my dad to know the anger was already rising. I could hear his boots slamming against the kitchen floor, loud and heavy, like the storm in his chest was spilling into everything. Mom was at the stove, her movements too careful, too precise. I noticed the way she held her left arm close to her body, like she didn't want us to see it. I didn't ask why. I already knew. The fresh bruises weren't hidden under her sleeves this time. They were on full display, a muted purple on her skin that only I seemed to notice. The smell of burnt waffles hit me before his voice did. "Are you serious?" Dad stormed in, eyes narrow and vicious. "This? Waffles? You can't even make breakfast right." He sneered at the charred edges, slapping his palm on the counter like it was some personal betrayal. "Worthless," he muttered under his breath. Then louder, "You're fucking worthless." Mom didn't react, not at first. Her hand froze over the pan, her lips tight as she tried to keep it together. "I'm sorry, she started, but he cut her off. "Don't give me that shit," he growled, waving a hand like he was dismissing a fly. "You never get it right, do you? No wonder you've never been good for anything." I didn't want to look at him. I just stared at the waffles, my stomach turning. But Mom didn't say anything else. She just moved to the sink, wiped her hands slowly, like the whole kitchen was an explosion just waiting to happen. When he left, the door slammed behind him so hard the house shook. The tension didn't go with him, though. It lingered, thick and suffocating. Mom turned to me trying to smile, but it was weak, like her face was too tired for it. She wiped at her cheek, and I saw the faintest trace of a tear she didn't let fall. "You know how he is," she said quietly. "You have to ignore him, that's all. You have to." I just nodded. I didn't want to hear it. She always said that, like we had a choice, like ignoring it was enough. I grabbed my little sister's hand, already tugging her toward the door before Mom could say anything else. "Let's go," I muttered, forcing my voice to sound normal. I didn't want her to see me flinch when we passed Mom, so I kept my head down, kept moving. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. The wind cut through my jacket, biting into my skin. We didn't talk much as we walked to school. Leah, my little sister, was still small enough that she needed help keeping her scarf from blowing away. Her nose was red, but she smiled at me, and I could tell she was trying to act tough, like she thought I needed it. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes straight ahead, following the familiar path to school. Then I saw it, a shop window, reflecting the cold street, and a security officer standing inside. He was calm, focused, breaking up a brawl between two men who were shoving each other. The officer didn't shout, didn't get rattled. He just moved, smooth and controlled, like he'd seen this all before. And he had, You could tell by the way he didn't flinch when one of the guys pushed him. There was something about the way he handled it that stuck with me. It wasn't just that he was in control, it was the way he stayed calm in the middle of the mess. That kind of control, that steadiness, was exactly what I needed, what I wanted. Leah yanked at my sleeve. "What are you looking at?" I blinked, breaking away from the image in the window. "Nothing," I muttered. But my heart was already racing, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I could handle all of this. Maybe there was a way out, a way to stand like that officer, unshaken, no matter what the world threw at me. Leah was still watching me, waiting for me to say something else. I met her eyes and forced a smile, then pointed toward the school up ahead. "Race you." She grinned and took off, her footsteps light against the snow. But I wasn't looking at her anymore. I was thinking about that officer, about control, about the kind of person I needed to be, and for the first time, I thought maybe I could be that person, if I could just hold it together long enough. We got home late, the cold still biting at our faces, Leah's cheeks rosy and nose bright red from the wind. I was already exhausted, but when we walked in, I could smell it. The sweet, familiar scent of honey biscuits baking in the oven. Mom was in the kitchen, her apron tied tightly around her waist, like she always did when she wanted to pretend everything was okay. But I could feel it. The air had that edge to it, the silence before the storm. The front door creaked open, and I heard Dad's voice, slurred and heavy. "Smells like shit in here," he muttered as he stumbled in, dragging his feet across the floor. He didn't even take off his jacket. The sharp odor of whiskey followed him, lingering in the hallway. Mom didn't respond, but I saw her tense. She was trying so damn hard to keep it together, but I could see it in her eyes. She already knew what was coming. She didn't want to make him mad, never did. I stepped back, holding Leah close. She was too young to understand all of this, but she wasn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. Dad looked at the dinner table, his eyes narrowing like he was sizing up an enemy. "Honey biscuits?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Great. Just what we needed. More fucking carbs." Mom didn't say anything. She picked up a plate, her hands trembling slightly as she set it in front of him. And then, like clockwork, it happened. Dad slapped the plate out of her hands, sending it flying across the room. It shattered against the wall with a sound that made my stomach turn. Mom flinched, but she didn't scream, didn't fight back. She just stood there, frozen for a second, her face tight. "Look at you," he sneered, pointing a shaking finger at her. "You think anyone's gonna give a shit about your fucking biscuits? Pathetic." I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop!" I shouted, my voice breaking the tension like glass shattering. Everyone froze. Dad's gaze snapped to me, a sick smile spreading across his face. "What, you want to tell me what to do now, huh? Playing the hero like some fucking superhero?" I didn't care. I stood my ground. I said stop. Dad's smile faded, but only for a moment. He took a step toward me, looming, eyes wild. "You're no better than she is, you know that? You think I'm the problem? Look at you." Mom moved in between us, her hands outstretched, trying to shield me. She didn't even look at me. She just said, "Please, please, let's just eat, okay? We're all tired." But I wasn't looking at her. I was staring at him, my heart racing, and all I could feel was this deep, sharp ache, the same ache that had been there for years. It hit me like a fucking wave. And that was the moment I realized. She was never going to stop him. She was never going to say enough. Dad huffed and turned, stomping out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind him. The sound of it shook me, rattling in my chest. I didn't move. I stayed rooted to the spot, watching Mom slowly bend down to pick up the broken shards of the plate. Her hands shook as she reached for them, and I saw the blood. Just a few drops at first, then more as she cut herself on the sharp edges. "Mom," I said, my voice softer this time, but my words felt too heavy, too weak. She didn't look at me. She just kept cleaning, carefully, methodically. "We need a roof," she whispered, her voice distant. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to scream at her to stop, to tell her she deserved more than this, but I couldn't. She wasn't going to change. She wasn't going to leave him. That night, after we ate in silence, I sat in my room, staring at the walls, the list forming in my mind. Facts, feelings, control. I wrote it down, each word a promise, a reminder. I had to keep it all straight, had to make sense of it. Facts. He hurt her. He always came back, and he always got away with it. No one did anything, not even me. Feelings, anger, fear, a pit that swallowed everything else. Control, what I needed, what I had to take. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I stayed up watching the clock tick by, thinking of how to get out of this, how to make things different. I wasn't going to let it be like this forever. The next time he raised his hand, I wasn't going to stay quiet. I was going to say enough and mean it. The years after that night felt like a blur of quiet survival. Mom was always tired, always doing something. She'd stretch our groceries, make one meal out of three, trade coupons with anyone who had extras. She'd skip meals herself to make sure we had enough, but she never complained. She just kept moving, kept going. Like if she didn't, the whole thing would fall apart. We learned to deal with it, to not ask too many questions. When we didn't have enough for snacks, she'd find a way to make do. "It's just for a few days," she'd say, even though I could see the worry in her eyes. School was my escape. It was easy to get lost there. Debate team, yearbook club, anything to stay away from home for as long as I could. I didn't care if it was nerdy. I didn't care what people thought. I wasn't going back to that house unless I had to. Leah, on the other hand, was still young enough that she didn't always understand the tension. She'd skip around the house, humming or talking about some new game or show. But sometimes, when Mom was quieter than usual, I'd catch Leah staring at her, like she was trying to figure out something big. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, Leah crawled into my room and asked, "Do you think Mom still loves Dad?" I didn't even have to think about it. I looked at her and I could feel the weight of it, of everything we'd been through, everything we'd seen. "She just loves us more," I said, and it came out like a vow. Leah didn't argue. She just nodded, her small face serious. I could see the way her mind worked, even at that age. She could feel it too, the cracks in the walls, but we were both used to them by now. Sundays became our sacred day. Mom would take us to the library, where the smell of books was the only thing that made it feel like we were somewhere safe. She'd check out a pile of cookbooks and history books, always pretending that the weight of the world wasn't pressing down on her. We'd spend hours there, reading, or sometimes just sitting in the corner by the windows, watching the world go by. It was the one place where nothing felt wrong. After the library, we'd walk to the park. The crisp air, the crunch of the leaves underfoot, those were the moments that made the world feel manageable. There, on the swings, or on the cracked benches under the bare trees, everything felt okay, if only for an hour or two. One of those Sundays, I noticed her. A woman in a crisp campus security uniform, walking across the park, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She walked with a quiet confidence, with purpose, like she had everything in control. When she passed by, she gave us a small, knowing nod. It wasn't anything dramatic, but it was enough. I'd never seen anyone like that before. Someone who could be tough, in charge, and still look calm. That was the moment, the seed that planted itself deep inside me. I watched her walk away, and I knew, somehow, I knew, that was what I wanted to be. That was who I wanted to be. The nod wasn't just a gesture, it was a sign. Something in me clicked. The thought was simple, clear. I want to be strong like that. Maybe it was that moment that shifted everything for me. Maybe it was the first time I saw someone who didn't have to bend, didn't have to endure the way we did. Maybe it was the first time I saw someone hold power without losing herself in the process. I turned to Mom, who was watching us both from the bench, her eyes soft but distant. She didn't notice the security officer, didn't see the same thing I did. But I did. And I held on to that small, quiet moment as my own. That was the day I decided to stop just surviving. That was the day I started thinking about becoming someone who could protect herself and the people she loved, someone who could look at the world and say, enough. It wasn't hard to notice. My father's behavior shifted, just slightly at first. A little more cologne, a different brand, one that was too strong for the house, the kind that didn't belong in the kitchen or the living room, where it lingered in the air like something foreign, something out of place. His shoes got flashier, his gait more confident, as if he were stepping into some new version of himself. The phone call started too, late at night, when he thought no one was listening. I'd hear the low hum of his voice through the walls, his words too muffled for me to make out, but the tone was unmistakable. A soft, flirtatious laugh, followed by a rush of words I couldn't catch, then a quick, sharp silence when he'd hang up. Mom noticed too. She didn't say anything. She never did. I caught her looking at him sometimes, a knowing look in her eyes that didn't quite match the silence that filled our house. She thought silence kept us together, kept the walls from falling down. She believed that, for us, silence was the last defense. It wasn't, but she still held on to it. Then, one night, it all came to a head. I was sitting at the kitchen table, reading through some college applications, when he walked in, late as usual. He was freshly showered, that damn cologne still heavy on him. His shoes clicked on the floor as he moved into the room, his eyes immediately locking onto mine. "You're wasting your time," he sneered. "College? You think you're anything like your mother?" He laughed bitterly, like it was a joke. "She couldn't even keep a job, let alone run a family. You're just like her." I didn't flinch, but my stomach twisted. He was trying to hurt me. I knew that. I couldn't let him. Before I could say anything, Mom stepped into the room, her eyes narrowing as she heard the mockery in his voice. "She's not like me," Mom said, her voice steady but fierce. "She's better than both of you." It was the first time I'd ever heard her stand up for herself. For me. The first time she didn't cower. Dad's face twisted in disgust, his lips curling into a smirk. "Better?" he scoffed. "She's going to end up just like you, stuck here with nothing." I could see the tension in Mom's face, the way her shoulders tightened, but she didn't back down. She held her ground. "She's not stuck," Mom said, her voice growing stronger. "You're the one who's stuck. You're the one who never left. She's going to get out, just like you never could." Dad's smirk faltered for a second, but it quickly turned back to anger. He looked away, muttering something under his breath, and stormed out of the kitchen, leaving us there in the silence he always left behind. I felt a strange weight lift from my chest. It wasn't much, not enough to change anything, but it was a start. I watched Mom for a long moment, her hand resting on the edge of the table, her eyes distant. She'd defended us both. In her own way, she had fought. That night, after Leah had gone to bed and the house was quiet, I sat down across from Mom. The words felt heavy on my tongue, but they came out anyway. "I'm applying for corporate security," I said. My voice was steady, but inside, everything was buzzing. She looked at me, not surprised, but something flickered in her eyes. "Corporate security?" she repeated softly, as if testing the sound of it. "Yeah, it's something. I don't know. It feels like a way out." I paused, trying to get my thoughts together. "I want to be in control. I don't want to be stuck like him, or like you were, like we were." Her eyes softened, but there was something else there too. Worry. Fear. "You don't have to become him to get out," she said quietly. "Promise me that." I nodded, but I didn't make the promise she wanted. I couldn't. Not yet. "Don't become the thing that made you strong," she added, her voice small now, a whisper of something I didn't fully understand. "Don't let it take you." I didn't know how to answer her. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I knew it wasn't just about my future job. It was about something bigger, something darker. But I also knew I couldn't go back. I couldn't be like him. I wouldn't. "I won't," I said, my voice firm. And in that moment, I meant it. But I also knew that there was something inside me, something that was changing, something that wasn't afraid to fight back, even if it meant becoming something I didn't fully understand yet. I came home on break, the familiar weight of the house hitting me as soon as I walked through the door. The smell of stale coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the silence, it all felt like a shadow over everything, like nothing ever changed. But this time, something was different. I found Mom in the kitchen, a cup of tea in front of her, but she wasn't drinking it. She was staring at a stack of papers. Divorce papers. I didn't need to ask what they were. I could see it in her face before Dad even stormed in. "Here," Dad said, tossing the papers onto the kitchen table with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "You're not needed anymore." His voice was thick with that familiar biting contempt. He didn't even look at Mom when he said it. Mom's hands shook as she picked up the papers. She didn't even try to argue. She just looked down at the papers, her eyes too tired to cry. "Please don't do this," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know we've had problems, but—" "Don't try to guilt trip me," Dad interrupted, his voice rising. "I'm done. I've got someone else now. You can't keep pretending that this family is intact when it's falling apart." He turned on his heel, his shoes clicking harshly on the floor as he stormed off to the living room, already on his phone, his attention elsewhere. Mom was still sitting there, staring at the papers, her shoulders slumped, like the weight of the world was crushing her chest. I watched her for a moment, not sure what to say. She was always so strong for us. But this was breaking her. Later that night, I was in my room, trying to shake off the feeling of tension in the air when I heard Dad's voice. Low, soft, the kind of whisper that crawls into your ears even when you don't want to hear it. "You'll get the house," he said. I crept to the door, pushing it open just enough to see into the living room. There he was, on the phone again. His tone was almost sickly sweet, too friendly, too smooth. "Yeah, I'm working on it. She'll sign the papers. She won't fight me. She knows she can't." I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I didn't need to. I knew who he was talking to. The mistress, the one who had taken everything from us piece by piece. I backed away from the door, my heart hammering. This was it. He was promising her the house. He was going to throw Mom out like she meant nothing, like we meant nothing. The next morning, I found Mom on the back steps, sitting there with her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look up when I walked outside, didn't even seem to notice me at first. "Mom?" I said softly, not sure if she'd heard me. She looked up, her face pale, drawn. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying but didn't want anyone to know. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know how to fight him without losing everything." I sat next to her, my back against the cold brick of the house. For a moment, neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. We both knew how deep we were in it. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, "he won't win." "Not this time." She looked at me, her expression blank at first, but then something shifted in her eyes, a flicker of hope, like a light breaking through the fog. "But I don't know how to make it stop," she said. "What if I lose everything? What if I can't get out of this?" "You don't have to do it alone," I said, my words firm. "I'm not going to let him take you, take us. We're stronger than this. We've always been stronger than this." She didn't say anything for a long time. Her hands were trembling, but she didn't pull away. She just sat there, looking at me like she was trying to find something she'd lost, something she thought she couldn't get back. "I promise, Mom," I said, my voice low but certain. "He won't win, not this time. We're going to fight." She nodded, but it was a quiet, uncertain gesture. I knew she was scared. She had every right to be. But I also knew that I wasn't going to let this be the end of our story. Not when I had the chance to change it. And this time, it wasn't just her strength I was holding on to. It was mine. It wasn't a surprise when Dad showed up that afternoon, dragging the mistress behind him like a leash he'd just gotten used to pulling. The doorbell rang, and I knew before I even opened it. I could hear his voice through the thick wood, that smug, self-satisfied tone of someone who thought they'd already won. When I opened the door, there they were. Him in his flashy suit, the same arrogant smirk plastered on his face. And her, the mistress, all bright lipstick and too high heels, her laugh too loud, her presence too fake. She looked at me with a smirk of her own, like I was the joke, not the other way around. "I've got the papers," Dad announced, shoving the divorce papers at Mom like they were a demand, not a formality. He didn't even look at her, just waved them in her face. "Sign them, or you'll be left with nothing. I'm done." His words were clipped, final, and carried the weight of something he thought was over. Mom stood there in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she held onto the edge of the counter. She didn't move, didn't even speak at first. She didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes, the defeat, the quiet panic she always hid. The mistress stepped forward then, her eyes gleaming with that cruel satisfaction. She didn't even bother with niceties. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" she mocked, eyeing Mom like she was nothing but a pathetic shadow of someone who'd never mattered. I couldn't stand it anymore, not another minute of this humiliation. I stepped in between them, my chest tight with a mixture of anger and cold, hard resolve. My voice cut through the room like a blade. "You think you've already won?" I asked, my tone calm, but there was steel underneath. I was done letting them walk all over us. Dad's eyes flared. "Move out of the way, kid. This doesn't concern you." "I'm not moving," I said firmly. "Not this time. You don't get to do this to her anymore." The mistress laughed, an empty sound, but I didn't flinch. "Oh, how cute," she sneered. "The little girl is playing hero. Does she even know what's going on?" "Shut up," I snapped. The words were barely out of my mouth before I realized what I was saying. But I didn't back down. I was done being quiet. "You have no right to talk to her like that." Dad was about to say something, but I cut him off before he could. You don't scare me, and neither does she. You don't get to make her feel worthless. Not anymore. For a second, no one moved. The silence hung thick, like it was daring us to break it. Dad finally grunted, shoving the papers toward Mom again. You'll sign, or I'll make sure you don't get a dime of this house. You'll end up with nothing. I stood there blocking the door, watching Mom. I could see her struggling, her face torn between the years of trying to keep it together and the terror of losing everything. But something in her eyes changed. For a brief moment, she didn't look defeated. She looked like she was actually thinking. I'm not signing, she said quietly, her voice trembling but determined. It was the first time in years I'd seen her stand her ground. Then we're done here, Dad sneered, pulling the mistress by the arm as he turned to leave. The door slammed behind them, leaving me and Mom standing in the thick silence. That night, after everything settled, after the anger had burned off, I went to my room. I didn't feel tired, though. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, thinking about all the things I needed to do, all the things I needed to take control of. I opened my laptop and started working, not as a daughter, but as someone with access to everything I needed. I started going through the company's financials, looking for anything that could help us. Bank statements, photos, eyewitness accounts from people who had seen the side deals and shady transfers. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about power. I wasn't going to let him take us down, not this time. I wasn't going to stand by while he destroyed everything we'd fought for. I filed the documents away, creating a folder labeled Plan B. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew this. I had leverage now. I wasn't a powerless bystander, not anymore. When I closed my laptop, the weight of it all didn't feel as heavy. I wasn't fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for something else: control, justice, whatever it took to protect my family from the man who'd torn it apart for so long. And this time, I wasn't going to back down. The boardroom was cold. I'd always hated the sterile, impersonal feeling of it. The long table, the rows of chairs, the giant windows that let in just enough light to make everything feel exposed. It wasn't hard to see why Dad thrived here. This was his domain, his kingdom, his rules. I stood at the back, my fingers pressing down on the stack of files in front of me. The room buzzed with nervous energy, everyone watching as Dad leaned over the table, his voice steady, arrogant. He was in his element. I built this company, Dad was saying. I made it what it is today. If it weren't for me, none of you would even have a job. He looked around the room, his eyes gleaming with that same superiority he'd worn for years. So let's not pretend like any of this is a surprise. Mom was sitting next to him, her posture small, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't look at anyone. She just stared at the table, trying to make herself as invisible as possible. I could see her shrinking under the pressure, the weight of years of his abuse still too much for her to shake off. And it was breaking my heart. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was trying to make herself small so he wouldn't notice her, so he wouldn't lash out. But I couldn't let it happen again. I watched as Dad continued to talk, spouting his nonsense about how he was the sole contributor, how no one could possibly understand the intricacies of the business the way he did. And then, as if on cue, he turned to Mom. Do you have anything to add? He sneered. Or is this all too much for you? I could see the tremor in her hands as she reached for her water glass. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come out right away. She was trying to steady herself, trying to hold it together. Actually, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, I think it's time for a change. The words were barely out of her mouth before Dad's hand shot out, slapping her across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, cutting through everything like a knife. Mom flinched, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just sat there, her face flushed, her lips trembling. I couldn't stand it. Not anymore. I stood up, my legs shaking with the force of what I was about to do, but I didn't hesitate. I walked to the front of the room, moving with purpose. Every eye in the room followed me, but I didn't look at any of them. I wasn't doing this for them. I wasn't even doing this for Dad. I was doing it for Mom, for everything we'd been through, for everything she had quietly endured for so long. I placed the files on the table in front of the corporate legal auditor. The room went silent, the weight of the moment settling in. I could feel the tension in the air, the realization that something was about to change. I have something to add, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. This isn't just about executive severance. This is about what's been happening behind the scenes. The room shifted uncomfortably. I opened the first file, flipping it in front of the auditor. These are financial records showing misappropriation of company funds. Millions of dollars transferred through fake LLCs. These transfers are illegal. I watched as Dad's face changed, the arrogant confidence slipping away, replaced by panic. I could see his fingers twitching, his jaw tightening. I turned the next page, and here's evidence of abuse. The documentation is clear. Multiple accounts of assault, both physical and financial. It's all here. The silence was deafening. Dad's face went pale. The mistress, sitting across from him, shot me a glare so venomous it could have burned through glass. But she didn't say anything. Her role in this mess was exposed, and there was no getting around it. "You're lying," Dad finally spat, his voice cracking, desperate. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not. You're the one who lied to all of us for years." The auditor leaned forward, glancing at the papers, then back at Dad. "We'll need to conduct a full review," he said, his voice low but authoritative. "Effective immediately, you are suspended pending an internal investigation." Dad's eyes widened in disbelief. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The mistress was silent, too, her expression twisted into something that wasn't quite shock but close enough. "I'll take my leave now," Dad finally managed, rising from his seat, his face red with fury. "But this isn't over." "It is over," I said, my voice cutting through the air. "Not this time." The room held its breath as Dad stormed out, the mistress trailing behind him, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. I looked over at Mom, who hadn't moved. Her eyes were wide, but something in them had shifted. Maybe it was a hint of relief. Maybe it was the smallest hint of hope. But it was there. We weren't done. We weren't broken. And finally, someone was standing up for us. And this time, we weren't backing down. The house was eerily quiet when we got home. The blinds were still drawn, the light dim and flat. Mom hadn't said much since the boardroom. She just kept her eyes forward, her hands folded in her lap, as if she was afraid to move too fast or too far. It was a look I'd seen on her before, back when she was trying to pretend nothing was wrong, back when she thought silence could hold everything together. I sat down next to her, my hand on her arm. "It's done, Mom," I said, trying to meet her eyes, trying to break through the fog of doubt that still clung to her. "Tonight the house is ours. It's really happening." She didn't say anything at first, just stared straight ahead, like she was still processing the words. I could see her fighting it, fighting the hope that had been buried for so long, but I wasn't about to let her doubt it. Not now. "I know you're scared," I said, my voice firm, "but you don't have to be anymore. We've won." Mom turned slowly, her gaze meeting mine. "I don't know how to believe that. After everything, how can I?" I squeezed her arm, a little harder this time. "You don't have to know everything right now. But you do know this. You fought. We fought. And we're not losing anymore. Not now. Not ever again." She nodded, but it wasn't the kind of nod that said she was convinced. It was a nod of someone who'd been through too much, too many years of expecting the worst. I could see that hesitation in her eyes, that tiny crack of doubt that wouldn't fully close. Just then, the doorbell rang. Leah came bursting through the door, her eyes wide with shock when she saw us sitting there, the weight of it all sinking in. I saw her take in Mom's face, the careful look she wore, and she froze. "What happened?" Leah asked, her voice small, her hands trembling just a little. She stepped forward, glancing at the table where the papers from the hearing still sat, a few remnants of the fight we'd won. Mom didn't say anything right away. She just stared at her hands. I could feel the tension in the room building. But it wasn't the same as before. It wasn't the same kind of suffocating silence. It felt different this time. Like the air had shifted, even if just a little. Leah's eyes scanned between the two of us. And then she rushed forward, throwing her arms around Mom. She hugged her tight, her small body trembling. "It's really over?" Leah whispered, her voice cracking. Mom didn't speak for a moment, but her arms wrapped around Leah, pulling her close. I saw Mom's face soften, that expression of weariness turning into something more like relief. It was there, the first real sign of it. "Yeah," Mom said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's really over." I stood there for a moment, watching them. The house still carried the echoes of everything that had happened here. The fights, the anger, the fear. But now, it felt different. Not like the threat it used to be. The scars of this place were still there, but they weren't open wounds anymore. They were just scars. They'd healed, and now they were reminders. Reminders of how far we'd come. The hearing finalized Mom's financial protection later that week. The judge awarded her full ownership of the house, back pay for maintenance, and a freeze on Dad's access to the joint assets. Everything he'd stolen from us, everything he thought he could walk away with. It was all coming back. The mistress disappeared, her role in Dad's schemes exposed, and with it, her hold on the company, on him, on everything that had been so tightly controlled for years. Dad's appeal didn't even last a week. The judge saw right through him. He had nothing left to stand on. And just like that, everything changed. We were free, we were protected, and Dad, he was nothing. His empire of lies and manipulation had crumbled, piece by piece, until all that was left was dust. That night, after the hearing was final, I stood in the kitchen, watching the lights flicker on in the house, one by one. It wasn't just the house that was lit up, it was us. Mom walked into the room, her expression softer than I'd ever seen it. She looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something different in her eyes. A flicker of peace. "You did it," she said, her voice steady, like she was finally starting to believe it herself. "No," I said, shaking my head. "We did it." And this time, I knew we had. The courtroom was colder than I remembered, and quieter too. Dad sat at the table across from us, his face drawn and pale, the years of arrogance stripped away. He didn't meet our eyes, not once. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to hide it. The sharp edges of his once confident smirk were gone. He looked small, defeated. The judge spoke, her voice firm, calm, as if she were stating facts that had long since been set in stone. She confirmed the protection order, finalizing the asset division in Mom's favor. Dad, who had once controlled everything, now had nothing. I looked over at Mom, her back straight, her hands folded calmly in her lap. There was no smile on her face. She didn't need one. She had won. The weight of years of fighting, of silently enduring, was finally off her shoulders. When the hearing was over, we stepped outside into the cold air. The sun had barely set, and the streetlights flickered, casting long shadows on the ground. Mom held the deed in her hands like it was the most precious thing she'd ever touched. She looked down at it for a moment, then up at me, her face unreadable. "I used to think endurance was weakness," she said, her voice low, like she was speaking to herself. "But maybe it's strength that waits." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She was right. She'd waited. She'd held on through everything, even when it seemed like there was no way out. And now, here we were, standing on the other side of it, stronger, different. We didn't say much on the way home. There was no need. The victory was in the silence between us, the kind of silence that comes when you finally know the fight is over. That night, after everything had settled, I walked through the house alone. I moved slowly, taking it all in, the quiet of it, the new sense of peace. I passed the kitchen, the hallway where we'd argued so many times. Everything was the same, but nothing was. The house felt different. It felt like it belonged to us again, not to the ghosts of what had been. Mom had kept this place together somehow. Now it was ours, and it felt like a new beginning. No more waiting, no more living in fear of what would happen next. I stood in the living room, staring out the window into the night. There was no noise outside, nothing but the stillness of everything that had finally fallen into place. The story had ended, not with a bang, not with drama or chaos, but with a silence so deep it spoke louder than all the years of fear. I took a deep breath and smiled. It was over, and we were free.